All right, so we are all here and would get started. If it's convenient, I would request those whom it's comfortable have the camera on. It just feels like a room full of people. Yes, Mary, I can do that. Just 1 second. So, Shwedal, while we were waiting, what I requested everyone was to go to the Google Slides and fill up one image of yourself, of your work, or of the project that you want to do, which we could use for introductions. So that introductions are animated and
apologies for keeping you all waiting. I had a problem with the link. I think I uploaded the image yesterday, Ishita.
Okay, great. Okay, I haven't seen
it. Yeah.
Right. So yes, again, back to those who are comfortable, let's have the camera on during most of all the sessions if possible, so that it feels like a room. I think I've covered the logistics before that we'll be documenting both in terms of photography and video. Any part during the session which you might become later uncomfortable about, you're most welcome to tell us and we'll edit that out from the videos as well. So it's not a blanket permission that we have sought. But yes, we do want to make our sessions accessible to others through YouTube channel. So we have an active YouTube channel and we keep figuring out that people go and listen to things. So we are happy about that. Okay, so short introduction. I am Ishita Shah. You might have read about me on the creators that were floating. I'm a historian and a designer. And I've been doing these kind of initiatives now for over 2 years, but otherwise working with archives for over a decade or archiving projects. And I'm very excited to have you all for the next edition of Constructing Personal Archives. When I read through everyone's proposal, I think what is the most exciting about this next batch, as we all say, right? What's the difference between the first and the next, I think, is how most of the projects are larger than life. They're looking at a cause, they're looking at some very deeper sense of care. And I think that's my high to get us all started today. Yeah, I am going to keep my introductions short. If you want to know more, we can always chatter. Today's this first workshop, definitely, I sort of plan to hold it together as I've written the schedule as well, with different kind of exercises. And then we obviously have Richa and Mehwish who are going to share their projects in much more detail, which is going to be more of a guest interactive session in the afternoon. So today morning, I'll present some things, we'll do some exercises, you all will share your responses, we'll move on to guest interactions, and then tomorrow, again, we'll do some exercises. Hopefully, these exercises and these conversations will be helpful in terms of you all building your proposals before we meet, and take some baby steps or the first steps that you need to take for your projects before we meet again in October, around the same time. So each session or each workshop is going to be mostly mid-month, so you can keep your weekend organized accordingly if it is helpful. Okay, so I think we can get started with you all introducing yourselves, which would be very exciting and fascinating. I also have the schedule in front of my eyes so that we make sure that we don't lapse anywhere and we don't make it a much longer day than that it is. For that, I'm going to request you all to keep your introductions quite tight. So who you are, where you're from, what you otherwise do, definitely very important for all of us to know, and what kind of a project you are intending to do over the next 4 to 6 months with the program at Constructing Personal Archives. I'm going to share the screen. Okay. So Aparna, I believe you haven't been able to add an image. Do you want to do that or?
Yeah, so Ishita, sorry, I was not able to, but I have sent it to you by WhatsApp with a request if you could upload it.
Okay. Okay, Harshada, we'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. So I'm really looking forward to being here, although it's going to be quite exploratory for me. I come from a background of ethnography, so I've spent a lot of time documenting other people's lives, and I think for the first time I'm going to be documenting mine. A year ago, I kind of stopped doing ethnography full time, and I got into tarot cards and astrology, something that I was doing on the side since I was 18 years old. But in the last year, it's kind of taken a forefront in my life. What I am really interested about is, as my life goes from uncertainty to what I hope is some kind of a certainty as I make the career shift, a lot of people who I talk to and I would read tarot cards or astrology or their charts for them, they're all kind of looking for certainty, particularly in this uncertain time. I mean, I started a year ago when we were just coming out of the pandemic. And I believe that the universe talks to us in sign. So the cards have a lot of signs associated with them. The Kundli itself is a big kind of a sign or a map around your life. So that's just what I'm looking at documenting, is just like certainty in times of uncertainty. I think that would be the theme, and that's what I'm looking forward to doing here. I'm not sure what shape or form it's going to take, but open to exploring what that looks like. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harshada, for a very poetic start to the morning. Namita will hear you out in the meanwhile.
Hi, I'm Namita. I'm from Pune and I'm a museum professional. My work over here, the photographs you see here are of a photographer who has a photo studio and it dates back to more than 50 years. Through the archives of the photographer and his studio, I'm looking at how the events of that place were shaped, and how the place was before and how it is now. And in a similar way, I intend to look at more such local photo studios and photographers and their archives, and how it has evolved over time and according to the place and the people also. Thank you.
Quite a fascinating project, and we hope we are able to take you through along, and you are able to then take it forward. I think much needed as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe that's, Shweta.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So I'm a designer and educator and an accidental, probably documentarian, also a filmmaker. I have been onto this project of documenting Navratri of Vadodara. The curiosity came from a very simple place, which was to go back and figure out what I had experienced in my childhood or my growing up years, but also a little bit of a hunch that what I had experienced was probably different from the other cities that I had seen Navratri in, like Ahmedabad or, Rajkot or other places. And I felt that each city in Gujarat had a unique story behind the way they celebrate Navratri, had a distinct style. And that is where I started. I made a film which came out in 2017, but after that I have been doing a little bit of research on and off, sporadically, not regularly. And I also have a lot of information which I want to put together. I think one of the things that I really am looking at in terms of culture and is understanding that culture is not something to be preserved or to be kept in a solid state. It's something that blends and builds with a lot of influences coming in, and redesigning the thought of culture itself. So this image also that I've shared is actually of some steps that are performed in Gujarat, which actually came from the Himalayas and became very popular. And but how you maintain the essence of something, don't lose it completely, as against what you see, something like what happens when you do like Bollywood Garba or something like that. So it's a fine line, right? That tug of war. So, and what I hope to achieve primarily, sometimes I think, is kind of getting the language of documentation, because I'm not a theory person. I'm an extremely practical person. So my words are very simple. I do not have the I don't know, actually the words to write something in a more scholarly way. So I'm hoping to learn some of that through this process, and also understand structure and get some kind of motivation with the group, because I work alone. So these are the three-pronged things that I'm really looking at over here.
Thank you so much. And I think what you highlighted is something that's there, Shwetal, in all the projects mostly, is this ongoingness, and how time becomes a part of archiving rather than time being the reason for archiving. And I think we'll understand this phrase more as we go along over the 1.5 days. Thank you. All right, over to you, Tanisha.
Hello, I'm Tonisha. I am trained in cultural studies. I'm currently working as an assistant professor at IIT Jodhpur in the School of Liberal Arts. In my research so far, I have looked at the connection of identity and spaces, because culture is ordinary. The high culture, low culture divide needs to be problematized a little. And since my PhD, I have been looking at the Sundarbans area in West Bengal. If you've heard of it, it's the estuarine forestway water systems that is at the tail end of West Bengal and flows into Bangladesh a fair bit. And it is a deeply marginalized space. It's primarily refugee settlements. It's a deeply cosmopolitan space. And we don't see a lot of Sundarbans reflected in mainstream. So I started by looking at ghost stories of children in the Sundarbans area to figure out how is it depicted, what are the politics of representation at work there. I hope to start storytelling workshops and create an open access, Creative Commons, community ownership, digital archive of saving them, because in their own voices is a very important part of this kind of archiving, right? I don't want to fall back into these very colonial tropes of fetishizing or otherizing or trying to do a very nativist, hamara bhi hai, that sort of a stance. And an open access digital archive would actually help. And along the way, it has the potential of participating in environmental conservation conversations and giving access to local practices, local knowledge systems. So that is broadly what I'm looking at. And in this workshop, see, I know my theory, I know my practice, but digital humanities is something that we are all learning along the way. I think very few of us are really trained into it. So since representation is such a core part of my work and we don't want to fall back into certain tropes, that is what I'm really hoping to get a sense of how to do it in the ethical lines in which I'm trying to go for. That, and of course, meeting a group of people with whom I can just come and talk to about these projects. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanisha. I think the two things that you mentioned, one, of course, yes, I think the bigger change in our way of programming this time's CPA is also to bring in the digital tools, which will happen in the later sessions. But also, I think because most of these projects would allow to talk about community representation, I don't know if we really have a document which we are all going to, fall back on, but maybe arrive at some of the things as we go along in the process. Yes, definitely. That's something that we have been hoping, and we are glad that we found projects who want to engage in those conversations. Not to say that that doesn't apply to personal archiving projects, because the moment then we said community, a person is a part of it, and where does the line change as well? So looking forward to exploring it together with you all. Okay, over to you, Zen. Sorry, I'm so used to calling you, sorry, Zanathun, yes, sorry. I'm used to calling her Nijum, that's the way she writes, but so you'll have to tell me also, Nijum, what should I call you for the workshop?
Call you, call me as Nijum, but formally I'm Jannatun Nahar.
Sure.
But I'm sorry I cannot on my video because I'm affected by conjunctivitis virus.
Oh.
So my eyes are pink. So
Oh, okay. Sorry, and I hope you feel better soon.
Yes, can I start?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm from Bangladesh now. Uh, so this is the photo from 1989. Uh, in the beside the horse, you can see there is a person with a yellow sari. So this is the person. She is Toeba Begum Lipi. So my intention is that when I worked with her in 2019, I took her interview in 6.5 hour long, and I took her interview. So this is my main material for this archiving project. And my intention is that first of all, there is limited art archive in Bangladesh. So after 1971, no artists are properly documented or properly written or properly archived. And when I got chance to work with Toeba Begum Lipi, then I go through her all over journey until 2018, and I saw that ups and downs in her life and how her journey shaped our art history in very well. So I think I should work with her journey, and so that I fixed the journey from 1986 to 1999, and this is her academic life. And what is the intention? Another intention is that the 1986 to 1999 is her journey in Bangladesh, and then she is started to, after her academic life, she started to explore more, and then finally we got so many things via her. So I want to work with her early life, and I want to focus on this journey, that how our art community is growing on that time, because we have no documented things. As far as I told, that 1971 there is no documented things properly, and only 14 artists are properly organized in government archive in the book. So I focused on the Begum Lipi because I know about more in future about this journey from 1999. Then there is a lot of journey also. So this is my project, and this is the photos from Mongol Shobha Jatra.
Okay.
First Mongol Shobha Jatra in 1989, and this is the only secular fest in Bangladesh. So thank you.
Wow, so fascinating. I mean, I'm sure some of us at least want to know more about this festival as well, apart from Tayaba Lipi's life as well. And I'm so glad that some of us have started archiving what is recent history and not wait for it to become another 100, 200 years old and then have it lost to time. So your project really touches upon that need to start looking at our recent pasts, especially because most of the countries have a lot of journey through decolonization, through migration, even economic reforms, and so on and so forth. And of course, the micro of it is its impact on art and culture. So we're looking forward to your project, Nijum, and thank you for making this group go beyond borders as well by joining us. So that's very
Thank you.
exciting. Okay, I'm going to go back up, and Apan, I'm just going to copy paste the cover, if that's okay. Yes, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aparna, and I'm a facilitator, faculty member at the Srishti Institute of Design in Bangalore. That's where I'm based. So I'm a writer, storyteller. I'm also an entrepreneur, run a publishing house where I publish um, um, child-driven content in terms of stories, poems, artwork, etc. And in line with my work with children, I have started a vertical called Storylines. And Storylines attempts to connect generations. So essentially, say, grandparents with grandchildren, so that family narratives are continued, they are preserved and archived. So it's a personal histories project. And that's why I'm here today. I've also worked with Ishita in the past, and I've attended her workshops before. What I'm sharing here is a book that I've brought out via my publishing house, Timbuktu. It's called Precious Objects, Memories, and People. And it's completely written by young people aged between 9 and 14. So essentially, what they had to do, this is part of a workshop, they had to connect and communicate with elders in their family, which is very desirable and something that the COVID lockdown facilitated. And the focus of these narratives had to be an object that has been in the family for generations. So once you turn the pages, you'll see that some people have used an old study desk, a piece of jewelry, inheritance like a wedding outfit, so on and so forth. Rocking chairs, coins. There are silver coins that have made their way from Lahore before partition to India, and then their stories. So I'm really passionate that these stories should not die out, and they must be archived. And it really gives children a sense of anchoring about who they are, their identity, and their past. So that's essentially why I'm here. How can I make this a more robust enterprise? In my own family also, I have elders who have lived through history, geography. There's been a lot of shifting around because they were in the services. And I think those stories have to be narrated as well. Ishita, I also want to tell you that I have, other objects in terms of stamps, and other than photographs, I have stamps and antique coins. And those stamps are also very precious because some of those countries don't even exist anymore, or their names have been changed with history. So that's also something that I want to talk to you about. What are the best ways of archiving different materials?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's, in a sense, is who I am.
Thank you so much, Aparna. I think with you and Dhanisha, what is exciting is that you're going to take this all to the next and the youngest generation. I don't want to say younger because I'm not old, but
yeah.
It's so fascinating, yes, that again, it can become a part of classrooms. And these were certain conversations which I've also been a part of. How do we sensitize the much younger generation, and had some very exciting experiences in Kitchen to Kacheri, which I'll speak about later, where it was also not surprising that the young is interested. It's really about how we serve it to them, isn't it? And that is where our roles as curators, archivists, storytellers become very critical. And yes, I'm looking forward to reading this book now that at least I have the PDF. And if you're okay, you can share it with the rest of the group as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Debankita, are you able to unmute now?
Hi, Ishita. Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Okay, over to you.
Okay, so I'm Debankita and I'm currently pursuing my MPhil research at University of Hyderabad. And since my research area is basically I work on Sanskrit literature. So this project is extremely different from what I do every day. And I really wanted to take this project because since I'm based in Hyderabad now, and I have been moving into the city and searching for all the I would say old buildings. I love to document and take pictures of old buildings, particularly Art Deco architecture. And so I thought since Hyderabad has become a cosmopolitan city now, and we all associate Hyderabad with Charminar. So I have pasted the pictures of this two thing. The left one is of Hussain Sagar Lake. This is a very important landmark in Hyderabad. And this lake has saved Hyderabad since several decades and years from flooding the city. And this is a statue of the Buddha right in the middle of the lake, and it's huge. And one can go boating around this structure and all over the lake. And the right one is, of course, Salarjung Museum, and where I can find many materials for my project. So that's why I have pasted this. Also, I have like uh, spent 2 to 3 whole days for one of the other projects in Salarjung Museum. So this is like, Salarjung Museum is huge. Like, it's one of the largest. It's one among the largest museums in India we have. And also today, September 17, marks the Hyderabad annexation day, when Indian Army took Hyderabad from the Nizams. And even though government of Telangana has declared it as a National Liberation Day, we still call it, like, we some of, like, our friends and I have been debating, like, what should we call it, Hyderabad annexation day or National Liberation Day. So yeah, and with this project I hope to, like, capture the spirit of Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb culture prevailing in Hyderabad, because the city has been influenced by many things like Mughal, Deccani, Persian, Europe, rituals, cuisine, costumes, language. Uh, Even though this is a bit unstructured thing, I hope, like, to document the city's journey to the many prospects of art and culture it has. And also I would like to document many of the living traces of culture, art and culture. Like, when we go around Hyderabad, there is a constant debate where we can get authentic Hyderabadi biryani. So there are many fine dining restaurants. Like, we have this Pakistani restaurant, we have this Arabian restaurant, and many other things. So I really like this kind of debate where we can get this authenticity. And with with the guidance of Ishita and efforts and all, I would really like to get a structured thing for my project. And hope that I can come up with better explanation afterwards. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Devankita, especially making this day mark it on a calendar, basically. And we know, okay, we have more reasons to start such a workshop and more for you for this project. And I think, yeah, these questions about authenticity, they're so exciting. They can be very unnerving. And I'm not going to say much, but we'll see how we unravel it through your project, but others as well. I just feel it's overrated. That's my personal perspective. Of course, more we deal with history and culture, connecting it back to what Shwetal was saying, right? It evolves, it changes, it moves. So it's as human or as living as us. So what is authentic about a life form? I mean, I'm just leaving it there, but it's going to be exciting because you're going to deal with a place and its culture. So it's going to be very exciting how we respond to it together and you individually. All right. Thanks, Kostav. So then I'll just go on to your slide.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm a practicing artist. Just recently passed out from University of Hyderabad with MFA in painting. So I'm continuing my project personal archiving in terms of archiving my own family, which is since for uh, 6 years, my uh, college to my masters. So it's an ongoing process. Like in a way, I'm doing painting as well as making self-published books recently, and in very recently, I have started a bookmaking project in which actually archiving the ghost stories. I mean, within the family, it started like in a way, uh, in a dinner, like particular day dinner in a like at the dinner table. My father was been telling like ghost stories within your family, like my grandfather, grandmother's stories, like how they experienced ghosts in the surroundings in a village, or so all that thing. So I've started making books about that, like the imaginative ghost, how it could be, the stories, and also it there is a like a, I mean, hidden stories of caste, culture, desires, ambitions, jealousies within a family, and as well as the neighborhood and society. So it's like that. I'm just tracking myself to, I mean, from personal to the world in a way. It's I could say it's a autobiographical archiving process. So yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kaustav. And I think it's a very exciting way to look at history. Of course, many artists have been doing it. I think Harshada, you also have very similar interests, and it'd be very nice how both of you would be using art of any form, doesn't matter, but to connect with yourself and then through yourself to the larger context and the stories. But in the process, yes, I'm definitely very curious about the ghost and what it looks like. How Bengali or Indian or not so Indian is it? Is it inspired by what you see on TV? Yes, so I think the fact imagery or holds, right, in the form of history itself is something that can be put under the lens. That is it inspired from our cultural bearings, or is it something that comes from our personal influences? And how does it affect our understanding of history? Kaustav, it's unfortunate the image didn't come up. Did you want to show the book? I can
Yes,
stop sharing.
maybe it's for network issue. Yes, I can show.
Later is also fine. Okay. Maybe we can finish Mary's introduction and then
Okay.
look at your image as well. Mary, over to you.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. So my name is Mary Gabriel, and I am a teacher. I'm teaching in college. I'm based in an academic discipline called memory studies. And in fact, that has led me to what I am planning to do right now. Now, what you see on the Google slide is how signboards used to look like in my hometown, where you'll have a very artistic backdrop. That's a temple located in the hometown that I have mentioned in my proposal. That's exactly how signboards used to look about 20 years ago. Now, when I visited my hometown in the recent past, I have seen that everything has changed to these vinyl flex banners, and you don't get to see those artistic representations, no? And I was curious to know what happened to those signboard painters who were so artistic, no? You know that it's just a landmark, no, for the shop and all that. But then the art in the background was really fantastic. So in memory studies, you talk about these. Memory studies has different facets to it. I am interested in the two strains, so to say. One is called lived memory, and the other is called material memory. Now, lived memory is when you try and document the lived experience of these people. In my case, it's going to be the lives of the signboard painters, no? As to there was a time when they were thriving in how, in fact, they had their own fan following and all that. I still remember that there was, there's an artist, a glamour artist called Silk Smitha. There was an artist who was painting her image on a signboard, and that signboard was meant for a liquor bar or something, okay? And there used to be a bunch of people in front of a studio or a shop, paint shop, just to watch him complete the image of Silk Smitha. And he in his interview was recalling when he finished doing his eyes, and eyes is the part where they do at the end, right? So when he finished with her eyes, and he could see about 20 to 50 people standing and clapping hands, no, like a finale, so to say. So a signboard, which was meant to be for a commercial purpose, no, it had its own artistic streams, no, where there were people following people. And there is a juice shop where they used to frequently change the signboards with similar artistic images. Okay. So now, if you go back to that town, you don't see any of these. All of it are simply either with those fluorescent lights or made up of those vinyl flex banners. So I'm interested in two aspects of this particular change, no, from the past to the present in the course of these 20-25 years, as to what happened to their lives, the lives of these signboard painters. So I have started with some interviews. The interviews are still getting documented. So I'm interviewing the signboard painters. And the second thing is, we don't have any document or archives about, archives of those wonderful artistic displays, no, which used to be there on the signboards of all the shops in the hometown. It's called Tiruvannamalai. That is where this Ramanashramam is located. Ramanashramam is a renowned place where Ramana Rishi had started his journey as a guru or something. So I'm interested in the lived experience of the signboard painters and archiving their experience, either in the form of a book. I'm interested in a book because I'm from a literature background. So I wanted to get a book published where I will be able to document the lives of all these signboard painters and what they are up to now. Another thing is that if you go search for any images of this town, you will always get images of the ashrams or the temples, and it will stop there. So the town that I'm talking about has a different face to it, where you had a lot of artists who are nowhere now. So I want to a digital archive for the material memory of Tiruvannamalai, and a textual archive, so to say, for the lived memory of those signboard artists. And I'm absolutely a baby on board in this forum, because I don't know anything about archiving. I am just learning. I've started to learn, and that led me to Miss Ishita's workshop here. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. I must clarify, I'm not an expert. I'm as much an accidental archivist as all of you exploring the subject. But I think, yes, it's just so fascinating when different kinds of projects want to use archival frameworks. I think that's something that we at Curating for Culture are more and more invested in. That instead of just talking about documentary heritage, which is usually associated with archives, the kind of project that Mary you're talking about can also be archived, and what are the ways, or how do we innovate new ways to go about it, as well as definitely think about possible outcomes. Yes, book could be one, but what are the other ways that such a extensive research project could be made accessible to more and more people? And we're so glad that you've also joined us. And I think this is a good time for me to remark that, yes, more than you are learning from me or one another instructor, I think it's the whole exciting part of this program has been of exchange between the different participants, because we have somebody from literature, we have somebody from digital humanities, we have quite a few designers, we have museum experts on board. So I think at some point, I'm just going to sit at the back and hear you all out. So much to learn together. Kaustav, do you want to share the book, image of your book?
Ishita, just a sec. I just
Yes.
want to ask Mary one question, which is, Mary, you mentioned that you were a college, you worked in a college. Is it
I
possible to share which college and where?
Auxilium College, ma'am, Vellore. Vellore is.
So you live in Vellore or you live in Tiruvannamalai?
I live in Vellore, but I am from Tiruvannamalai.
Oh, I see. Thank you. Very interesting.
Thank you, ma'am.
And share. This one is one page of my book.
Oh, nice. So it's actually a physical book.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
wow.
like that. It contains many pages like this. So I used to make this kind of books lot of. So yeah, it's my ongoing work practice. So
Fascinating.
yeah, I'll share later other pages and other books. Yeah,
Yes, definitely. We'll hopefully use this sharing session for, of course, the exercise discussion, but also in that space, if most of you want to show where your projects are. It's just that we'll all always keep in mind what I'd written in the email, that our projects are at different levels. So no pressure in terms of everybody having to produce something. But those who have definitely can share so it inspires the others. So that should be the plan. Mehwish and Richa, thank you so much for being with us in the introduction session. I'm just going to skip your introduction so that I do it more formally during the presentations, because I'm also thinking of editing of the videos and post-production. I hope that's okay. But I hope it was helpful for you to be here in the morning.
Yeah, thank you so much. I look forward to joining you all again in the afternoon.
Yes, looking forward to that. Thank you.
Same here, Shita. Hello, everyone.
Hi. Yes, we'll introduce you in the afternoon again. Okay, so moving on to the next part, which is the overview presentation. The intent before I start presenting is to try and take you all through as many different kinds of archiving projects. So don't be worried about the number of slides and the pace at which I might go through, because because our primary goal during these 1.5 days is to be able to identify different archiving intentions and what kind of processes or what kind of steps it might have followed. It was really important to sort of do this blast of possibilities, right? I'm right now obviously going to use projects which I have been a part of. So when you have follow-up questions, I can answer them. But eventually, once you start doing exercises, I'll also try and bring up other examples of projects which you could look at or which I know of, and it applies to everyone else. If you know of other projects which the participants in the room could engage with, we can start looking at those external examples as well. And what I mean over here is that these would work as case studies, right? Where you can dissect them, ask most critical questions, critique them definitely to be able to arrive at your structure, your process, what becomes of your project, right? So we're looking at them as inspiration, but we're also looking at them as specimens. Okay, so with that, let me just share my presentation. Give me a second. Okay, so on curating archives, yes, it's more of a personal narrative of different projects that I've been associated with, but it can't be called personal at all. It's all collective. I've not updated this credit list for this presentation, so I already know that many more people have been a part of the projects that I'm going to talk to you about. But definitely credits to all of them for what you will see following. So it's very important how we can look at these projects, and this is one of the ways, right? That there are three primary lenses or aspects that sort of start defining each kind of archiving project. That is documentation, dialogue, and dissemination. And the reason I'm putting dictionary meanings over here is only just to say that this is what we know, but as we will go forward into looking at the projects, this changes, this evolves, and we keep continuously finding new meanings for what is documentation, what is dialogue, what is dissemination, where do lines blur, and you do it quite unconsciously in many cases. So the first project, so some of the projects I'm going to go into detail about, and this is one of them, just detail enough for you to pick on the important cues. So CEPT Archive is India's first archive for architecture planning and design related material in India. And this was set up with an intention back in 2013, that let's look at unsung practices. So CEPT started with this intention that let's look at India's architectural history post-independence. Of course, that vision already has been expanded by now, and there are collections which are from the 18th century as well. But I think at the starting point, a vision like that was very critical to be able to say there is so much of Indian architecture post-independence which is not being accounted for. And hence, the responsibility of such an institution would be to recognize, to document, and make that work be more seen and accessible. So that's how it had started. And as you can see, it's now expanded to 18th century and present. And I wouldn't be surprised if the expansion keeps happening over the years. Now, what does and why do I call this slide dialogue? I think that's very important, right? I'm not calling it documentation because I think for a setup like this, you were coming up with the first institution of its kind, and you had put down some very larger goals in mind. You don't just go into few offices and get materials. It doesn't happen. Conversations become very important with the architect or with the architect's families, with, of course, government offices in this scenario, or with scholars who will then put you in touch with more architects, right? And that is what leads to documentation. So even though documentation in a way would be the first step for any kind of an archiving or a historical project, it doesn't happen always that it becomes the first step. This is also to say that there were a few key projects which were identified. So each archiving project can have its sub-projects or sub-narratives that it's focused on. And then in kind of an institutional archive, depending on your resources and wherewithal, you focus on the key archival practices, from listing to record management to digitization, and further on dissemination in terms of exhibitions or student orientation events of launch of a certain kind, or just a dialogue around archiving, architectural archiving. And while, of course, even in those days, it does come up, right? You're not even ready. Why are you thinking about an exhibition? I think this definitely is a myth, because you'll never be ready. You'll never have, history is never going to be complete, a project's never going to be finished. Most of you have been talking about things that you have done with your projects, and there will be multiple outcomes. So I think the same applies with when you're building larger institution projects as well. You keep thinking of different ways to bring in public. And then at some point, your practice could question that when does public become a part of your archive or archiving practice, so that they don't just become visitors or they just don't become observers of the process, but they actually, if you start roping them in at different stages, can they become a part of the project as well? And I'll show what that means towards the end a little bit. This was just to say, yes, once you have such a setup, this is the kind of process mapping that we did. This was also because I had to hand over when I was moving on. But the different steps and the different routes that a project can follow. If this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. So there isn't a unidirectional way to go about, and it's not at all a linear process. Even though over here it still sounds very linear, looks very linear, but there is a lot of back and forth, a lot of cyclic things that happen. Visibility also comes in the form of digital archiving in the day and age that we are living in. So making every archive accessible through the digital platform comes with all the pros and cons, of course, but one learns to navigate them and then get the material out there for people to access. So that was 2013. I'm jumping to 2021. So obviously the projects are definitely not in a linear sequence, but I've arranged them more by the scale. So what another form of an institutional archive could look like, some of you have been following us on Instagram and might know, but it was important to show over here where the lines start blurring out very beautifully, in fact. So where you have lakhs of papers and thousands of books in a library, that would be obviously one form of documentation. But as I said, you know that the family members are old enough. You don't want to lose the stories. So Oral History Project started a year ago, which is the second year of the project, right? So it's very early on to take on more, but it becomes very critical. And very recently, we also started working with the family members and the family properties, because again, that was very critical to think about. What happens to these spaces? What if they change again? What kind of memories will be lost with the change of the architecture? And we even extended the dialogue in terms of engaging with the city, right away in this internship, which was in summer 2022, to be able to say that what if those collections are lost while we are too busy self-involved looking at what Patni family holds on to. And once we engage with the city, it was obviously very important to engage, to bring it back to the city, right? So let them know why you are doing what you're doing, how are you doing it, take their inputs. So it became a community engagement initiative, even though right now in the image it looks like an exhibition. We got quite many responses. But this is not to definitely leave out the academic processes. So we have an academic collaborator. We keep inviting more of them who want to write research papers or present at a conference or innovate about doing other kinds of events where Avni and Dipshika had their meeting about textile conservation in the exhibition space at Kitchen to Kacheri in Delhi. So while we keep innovating, also to keep checklisting different kinds of sub-projects. So it feels too much to do, but it also feels like time's running short, right? So how do you balance it out, and what kind of goalposts do you work with when you're setting out your projects? On the other hand, there could be projects which might not go far as well, right? So this is the Brito Trust Archives, and I was basically mentoring them. They have been in, so this is in Bangladesh. Brito Trust is over 20 years old. And what they are into, they are running artist programs of many different kinds. And hence, they are also loaded with a lot of digital data about different artists, about different programs that they have been doing. And there's no doubt that this itself is a lot of valuable resource material. So rather than questioning why something so recent, accepting that, yes, this also needs to be looked at before it gets lost. And also to make sure that maybe when you're doing it, when you're so young, you're setting out frameworks which will help you document rest of the programs that you do in the future. And because this was a project in making, there were other multiple responsibilities at the trust. What was important is this dialogue, either about how do you develop the frameworks. I don't think this image is going to be very clear, but what we were doing over here is defining the information architecture for the archive. How will we classify? What kind of files will go where? And because of this conversation, what got highlighted is the need for the organization to have internal conversation about their vision behind an archive. And I think this is very critical for most of your projects, that while you have outcomes or outputs in your mind, if you can think of vision statements, or if you can think of long-term and short-term goals while you're developing your proposals, even if you've already done something. So in Shwetal's case, you've already made a film, but now you're still interested in archiving and creating a digital repository. Why? Right? And where do you start? Because for you to start somewhere, that larger picture of the vision statement is going to be very critical. And hence, in the span of 9 months, apart from arriving at these systems and putting all the data into record sheets and the right kind of folders and naming systems, we obviously were able to ideate about what kind of a digital platform would it sort of call for. And now it's a project in forming, and hopefully we'll see it happen over a year or two. So it's also to say that different projects, young and old, will live out different lives depending on the resources, depending on the volume of data that you're dealing with, depending on the support systems that you have. So keeping that in mind while you're building your proposals is going to be very critical. This is another young project. Again, pace will change. They are 3 decades into, so Biome is a firm into ecological solutions. I was working with one of their wings, which was architectural. And that architectural firm has been into practice for over 3 decades. And again, the same question, they're not too young, they're not too old, but yes, they have a lot of work, over 700 projects when we started in 2019. And what they're doing is something that's more important, whether it's the volume or not, but them trying to build a narrative around self-engaged homes and spaces, so that we can unload the earth, we can unload the ecological setups. How do you communicate about that? Now, of course, it was supposed to be a book project. It is a book eventually, but the framework was still very archiving practices oriented. We didn't want to assume that all that we had was enough. We wanted to go back to certain sites, see if they have changed. Of course, if the documentation from the older times was not good enough, is why we were at one of the older sites, because we thought it needs to be redocumented. Also taking the documentation and mapping it to be able to see it against time, to be able to see it against typologies, some very basic practices, but it helps you see the content more objectively. And of course, these are the archiving setups, again, the information architecture of how we will organize the material. But this is to say that when we started seeing all of this against time and against typology, I think it gave us clearer idea that that's not the way the story should be told. Sometimes we do exercises to know what not to do in a project. In between, of course, we got very excited also to see the whole project also have a second ending, which was to have its own archive. It was almost through, and then there were some hiccups, so it hasn't become live, but we still have the structure in place at their office, and this is how the archive would look, where projects are divided. Of course, projects have material divided, and then material is divided by its subcategories. So that when somebody wants to access certain kind of details, certain kind of drawings, it's easy to pick a code and ask for it. So this borrows from, obviously, the way we did work at Sept Archive. But coming back to the book, and coming back to if chronology and if typology was not the way to go about writing a book, how else did we want to do it? And we said the story is about so many people coming together, whether it's the clients, whether it's different kinds of architects and designers, whether it's the contractors. We also tried to talk with the masons and the daily wage workers, but some conversations obviously didn't yield much because we were perhaps less prepared, I think. But conversations, so here dialogue was not to build the archive, but dialogue as a way to extend the archive into an outcome. And this was, I think, a video for the archive, but I'm going to move to the book. So I don't think I've put the final images of the book, but it's out there on the internet. It's published. It's a 3-set diary. It's called Biome Diaries. And what it does is it becomes a mix of different kinds of conversations, different kinds of authors coming together. So it then became a completely crowdsourced publication, and the archive was made accessible to all of them to want to interpret, critique, and write about their experiences or their tryst with ecological architecture. Now, from institutional and offices, how personal can we get? And this is where family history started coming into the practice. We did workshops, smaller workshops first, and we had all kinds of projects, from Niyati looking at her grandmother's sari collection, Sukhada looking at her grandfather's expose and work into Marathi literature. He was a journalist and an activist. I'm forgetting, sorry, her name. The participant looking at women migration in Rajasthan post-wedding and what it meant for their personal histories, to somebody looking at family history and wanting to make art around it. Similarly here, where it was about families' migration from Botad to Bombay, as well as Ninad over here wanting to look at a community temple and what it means to the community in Bombay today, which has been preserved for over 100 years now. So what does that living temple mean to people? So I think the key question when we started off was to ask, who are your projects for? Right? So while I'm showing you the images from very different stages, it was very important that we started with the question of dissemination. So you can see already the sequence, upturning and unturning. And then for some of them, it was very important to ask the question about where is the material or what is your material. This is why it was also there in the Google form. I understand that everybody might not have it, but that question is very important, that where is the material? What is it that you're going to work with? How are you going to go about looking for it or collecting it? So while over here, Rupal had the images, or she could dig them out from her relatives' homes, Wallaby had to start looking at internet references or similar looking objects and start recreating memories. And it extended all the way into a form of a dialogue where her grandmother narrated and was able to narrate to such a beautiful extent that Vallavi was able to recreate the house which is lost. Sorry, recreate the facade of the house which is lost. Now, on the completely opposite end, here is an exercise that Niyati does with her mother online, because Niyati was in London at that time and her mother was in India, to know about Nani's saris. And these are the sketches which her mother has done, which it's a photograph of a photograph, basically. To be able to connect back to histories and to connect back to what kind of images and what kind of tools or content are we working with? Sorry, not tools. So I'm going to close the family history bit with a more thorough project to give you a sense of start to end. And here is Deepti's project, where she wanted to look at the archives of her father-in-law, whom they had lost recently in 2019. Professor B.V. Shikantan is an Indian astrophysicist. She started with the intention of what to do with his materials, and it turned into a project about her son, or for her son, because she realized that why she's really into it over the 6 months of CPA was to understand that she wanted Agastya, who had only spent 1.5, 2 years with her tata, grandfather, to be able to relate with his grandfather over the years, and not necessarily only as a scientist. And this is why the personal became very important. Not to say that she was not looking at his scientific papers and materials as well. So she would fall back onto two sides of his life. And then, of course, what she made was a narrative cutting across tangible and intangible experiences of his life. At one point, she obviously also wanted to think of a museum inside the house, a museum of objects. But of course, this was all happening through COVID, so it was a bit of an ambitious project. And eventually, she ended up making something very similar to what Kaustav showed us right now, a few diaries or a few storybooks of the archival memories and histories, which would also be a way of the material not getting lost. So preservation was obviously a key, but it also was included with anecdotes and narratives, which would make it very engaging for Agastya to want to flip. And hopefully at different ages, it would mean different things to him. This is not the end of it, though, which was very beautiful to know that eventually, because of different connections, and so while Venkat Srinivasan, the archivist at NCBS, was not really a part of CPA, but we had done engagements with him earlier. So Deepti must have fallen back onto those conversations, and this whole excitement of why things should be preserved and how things should be preserved led to later B.V. Shikantan's scientific papers going to NCBS, and the physical archive becoming a form of a book, and hopefully it will also become a museum someday. I'm not getting into other projects, but this publication, Constructing Personal Archives Compendium, is available online, and I'll share the link for you to go through other projects. People have worked with audio montages, people have worked with sari collections again, or people have worked with photography and negative collections, and the anticipated outputs and the outcomes have been very different than what we had thought of, right? And some projects have lived on in more than one ways. Some of it, which also you'll get to hear in the afternoon. And from here, we'll again go back to a different scale, right? So we came from institutional to institutional becoming more personal in terms of offices or practices, and from there coming down to the most individual or the self or the family level. And from here, again, thinking of ourselves as people of a larger setup society or a community. What kind of community archiving projects have happened is what I want to take you through. There are two of them. One is more of a larger community, one is of a sort of genre. So this has been an expedition, right? So this never started with an intention of archiving. I have to start with that. So I was with Shishti as well, with the UNESCO chair, and we were doing different kinds of projects, for different kind of courses. And one important project which we did in the winters of 2017 was to launch an open studio called Contesting Heritage, to help students from diverse disciplines reflect onto practices of changing practices of heritage in the country today, and how they all from different design disciplines can contribute to it. So they all went to very different kinds of contested heritage sites within Karnataka. And one of them was Hampi, Anegundi, because of our connections, but also because we all know, those who all don't, Hampi is a World Heritage Site, one of the first India's World Heritage Site. And perhaps since then it has always been in the papers because something or the other doesn't seem to work in terms of the setup. Sorry, I could hear that somebody wrote something in the chat, but I cannot see. Do you want to unmute and tell me?
Ishita, no, I had a question. What does contested heritage mean?
So that's what I was just clarifying. So contesting basically over here, or contested places which have become, so spaces of conflict or contestation in terms of very different kinds of point of view. And that is what I was just saying, that Hampi has always been in the news because UNESCO has put certain kind of guidelines. The local organization has put its own guidelines. ASI is following its own set of guidelines. Community in all of this suddenly doesn't know. And you go around bulldozing community settlements because it is coming in the way of preservation of a temple. This is one example. Of course, you all must have come across pillars falling off. You must have come across tourists doing things to the monuments. So this contestation around whose heritage is it really? Whose place is it, right? And this is what we saw in the other 3-4 sites as well, that Joke Falls has its own problems of the government wanting to make it perennial waterfall, which is not ecologically viable, but also definitely not good for the indigenous communities there. And who is there to say? Who is there to take a call on this? So it's not just conflict, because conflict would otherwise mean that, okay, just making two parties fight, but not that. Contestation sometimes means that these are sort of unresolvable if you look at it only from one point of view. And how many point of views can you sort of take into consideration to even address them? And I don't mean to make it a little grim, but yes, at least from where I see it, some of the contesting sites usually remain contested because there's nobody to claim. And the moment somebody tries to claim, there are more ownerships that keep arising, right? So they sometimes become unanswered forever, kind of a thing. So coming back to what the students were required to do, of course, was have certain kind of training sessions in the classroom. One of them was obviously with Dinesh and Janastu team to understand how they could do live archiving. And there were other speakers as well, but then they were on site all by themselves, meeting with the local collaborators and working with the communities there, whether it's indigenous communities or it is local residents, to understand the situation and raise the right kind of questions and concerns. What we did at the end of that 1 month, obviously, was a conference in terms of wanting to engage in a dialogue. Some of the groups had solutions to offer. Some of the groups had games and more interactive ways of engaging with the audience to say that, okay, problems can't be solved, but let's learn more about it. Let's find out how people respond to these concerns. But in the process, of course, why I'm showing you all of this is that a lot of data got collected. A lot of material got collected. Some of them even tried to create a film. So this is the output for one of the Hampi teams, that they obviously did some of the design outputs, but they also put their own documentation into a film. Or some of them actually did comic strip building, or some of them did a sort of a project report or narrative writing. What do you do with all of this material, right? Instead of it lying in your hard drives and getting lost eventually. And this has been my concern because ever since I was in a design school, it was a question that why do we document so much for individual research projects or group projects and then not think about its life further, right? You're putting in so much of an effort. Anyway, so this was a question. It was lying at the back of my mind. In the meanwhile, the collaborator in Hampi, they suggested also that they would want to think about an archiving project. And we ideated together to see if we can build something more community-led, because they already have a community-led library. Could we do also a community-led archiving project? Because the Kishkinda Trust, they are the collaborators, they have also been there for over 20 years. And a lot of research, just like we had gone, other people who come and research, they might have assisted them or they might have just guided them. And hence, a lot of material lies with them. Apart from that, Shama has been a sort of a official member in many ways with the Intact Trust, with the partnering somewhere with ASI on projects, doing her own projects with the Kishkinda Trust. So they have their own knowledge repository as well. So what do you do with all that material? And we started doing the most obvious thing, which is first the physical organization of it, doing the record management sheets by doing the basic listing, trying to see how much content, what kind of content, what are the copyright issues that we're dealing with, and then trying to develop a information architecture. Now, this is where we got completely caught up, because there was so much of stuff which could be in different places, right? Because life on ground is way more integrated than maybe doing an architectural archive, that the projects were constantly in a form of flux, in a form of change, in a form of growth. And was it practical to duplicate them in so many subfolders, or was there a better way to archive it, right? And in this process, what we asked ourselves was that maybe we needed to move from documentation to looking at how the community members or how their narratives might help us archive. And this was a major shift, I think, even in the larger practice of curating for culture, to say, apart from the classification methods or the categorical methods that we use for archiving, how does narrative building help us look at archiving, or how critical does it become in certain kind of community projects? It's an ongoing research, so I don't have a lot of answers to it, but just letting you know that this is something we are highly, deeply invested in right now. So what we did in 2019 was to do a very thorough workshop with 8 of our students, again from Shrishti. So here, these are the Priyanka and Indira were the interns whom we brought on board. So this was more of a professional project, the earlier bit. And then we went back to the school and we said, we had a course on ethnography to offer. And we said, why don't we take them to the site? And we worked with the communities. We identified 4 indigenous communities. Some thorough recording happened, 20 hours each for each group out of 4 groups. Students had limited time, so obviously they were suggested to start building narratives and look for keywords or thematics which could show a different picture or another alternative picture of the history of Hampi. And that was the focus of the ethnographic survey, that the communities are asked to reflect on the changing history and the changing times and the changing landscapes, so that we can connect it back to the archiving project. So this is what the students did, but eventually, and of course, yeah, they also used a lot of different methods. And here I feel that we sort of borrowed from film and filmmaking and production methods to understand how could we look at the metadata, right? Not just look at it through, again, categorical ways, but the words and the sense of words which come from the community. Due to paucity of time, we worked only in English, but we were very aware that the content was not purely in English. And whenever we did something full-fledged with it, we would have to address the issues of translation and change of language, and what role does vernacular language play. They had stopped at making a WordPress platform where all the material was sort of written and narrated. But of course, all the digital files were not uploaded because it was a lot of volume of data and we didn't have the server space. But then in 2020, we applied. So this was, I applied along with 2 of the students who had graduated by them, and they wanted to take this project further, and they became RAs on this project. We applied to a smaller grant called Futura Tropica Fellowship. And even though again, still it remains at a very pilot level, what we are happy that we were able to achieve is to be able to see this happen, that a narrative was able to allow us to curate an archive, and narrative with sub-narratives, of course. So that is where you see these kind of keys on the top. And I'm not showing you the full platform right now, but the platform basically had about 4-5 sub-narratives and how they would interlink. And in that interlink and the URLs which would happen on the website, you would access a certain video from where the narrative was borrowed, or you would access certain photographs. So even this photograph would take you to 5 other archival images, which we might have got from the community, to understand how the narrative was built. But primarily, the narratives is a way to engage and to leave open a lot of loose ends of the conversation. And the last project, I know a lot of information, but as I said, it was only to take us through this variety, and then we can ponder over it over tea or coffee. This is something that has lived its completely own life. So now, having done all of these projects, this one came to happen in 2020, but the seed was sown back in 2019 when Sept Archive was happening. That where are the women architects and where are their archives? And they have also played such an important role post-independence in nation building. What happened to their representation? So, of course, these last two projects were built highly on the issues of representation. And the proposal to Graham Foundation was to look at the first generation women architects, women practitioners in architecture. But because one was aware over this decade that there are no physical archives to be found, or very little, it will have to be approached through an oral history recording process. And then, yes, the grant was received and you started off. Eventually, we have been able to speak with 21 we have been able to record oral histories of 21 different practitioners. But what is interesting is in this, how the project itself has changed to be able to say, we couldn't just speak with the architects sometimes, the younger ones, I mean, they have also passed away sometimes, the second generation ones, and how peripheral voices became very important. So you already expanded the focus of the archive in the making of the archive. Of course, it's still a question whether it was safe to do it or not, and we will know once we launch it, but how critical it became to speak to more people. Even the word practitioner sort of started getting expanded in the process, because it was very limiting to only call somebody an architect, because an architect themselves would have been a planner, would have been an educator. So then why not a conservator? Why not somebody who's been into research? Isn't research a practice? And it was very scary, I have to accept, because this is a very self-led project that, where do you draw the line? Where will I stop? Will I be able to finish somewhere? Will I close? And that scare was very real. Was very true, rather. So what happened eventually, while, yes, in process, we kept disseminating it through conferences, asking these questions even to our conference audiences, that, why did we do oral histories? What does it mean for women to open up about their personal lives while they talk about their practice? What is the negotiation that they have done? Or how should we visualize this content and make it more accessible? In the current scenario where the archive is in building, the digital archive, we're already struggling because the data has become so layered and so granular, because you're trying to learn from your previous projects and try and apply it and say, can an oral history project also be keyword searchable? And this is where we are with this project right now. Hopefully, we will try and close it somewhere soon and launch it. But what I'm trying to close with is that even though we had a vision statement, and even though we knew what the goalpost was, how these projects are so, I think, throbbing, right? Like a heart, that it changes, you feel something, and where do you leave yourself outside? Of course, I always thought that I left myself outside of the architect's door when I went inside. But it's easier said than done. And that subjectivity, is it helpful? Is it lethal? We'll know. We'll definitely know, because most of these projects are in process. So yes, I'm not ending it on a very, I'm not closing the conversation. My intention was to be more provocative, leave it open for us to deliberate about. As I said, to make us think through different varieties of ways in which you can build your projects, and what outputs would mean, what dissemination would mean, what users would need, right? Who are your users? Because between Sept Archives, between Biome Publication and Women Architects of Vastukala, this whole conversation about who are your viewers and listeners or readers has constantly been a question about how much can you touch the public. You want to make everything for the public, but can the public understand some of these things? And how many languages, how many formats can you work with? Just that. Okay, I'll stop. Anybody, any thoughts, questions? Sorry if it was too overwhelming, but it was sort of curated. And you can disagree with a lot of things. That's completely okay. I'm very happy to listen to all of that when we get back. Or even now in the chat. Yes, Tanisha.
Somebody else was beginning to speak.
Yeah, that's Aparna. So maybe you go first, and then Aparna has raised her hand, so she can go next. Yeah.
There is not really anything to disagree here. I just wanted to, I wish we can have the time and space to know a little bit more in detail about these archives a little, because we could see the mapping and I can understand the kind of questions and concerns you're raising around it. But a little more detail would help to sort of get the idea of it a little better.
Yes, definitely, yes. So I don't know if this sounds like branding or marketing, but what I'm trying to do here is also break the information which I will share over the 3 or 4 sessions that we'll all do together. If so when we start looking at what kind of record management, for example, or what kind of narratives, even in the narrative building, the iterations that we did between Anantan and me for the Hampi and Negundi project. So should we take it up then rather than over here? So yes, some of the projects we'll definitely go into detail of eventually. Yes, Aparna.
Yeah, so I was also having like a similar question in terms of like the different forms of archiving available. Like for instance, you'd mentioned the storybooks of the containing the anecdotes and the narratives, especially pertaining to the Tata and stuff. And then you'd also mention audio montages. So how do all of this? How do all of these come together? Like, is it a digital archive? Like, can it be like a blog where you can combine audio, video, and text, and that way it brings everything together in one storytelling format? What would be like an integrated, like where were her audio montages, or say even the documentation on the sari collection? Right. I'm looking for appropriate mediums and platforms.
Definitely. So that is again. So when we meet for the digital archive. So when I said the component of digital archive is very critical to this edition, we actually have a team who's going to come and demonstrate a platform that they have designed for us. And at that point, of course, they are basically very honest to say that they are not going to help archive. But hopefully, by the time we reach there in November or December or January, we would have seen different ways in which you could archive.
Yeah.
So what are the different mediums that you're using, and hence what are the platforms, right? Because the platforms are many. So the other way to put it is this: there are many ways in which, and instead of introducing them like a checklist in a classroom, right? Which is what sorry, but I would have done in an institution, or any institution would have asked us. In this case, could we curate the conversation based on how each one of you are approaching your project?
Yeah.
And again, definitely the only way for me to tell you this is going to be able to say, oh, listen, here Soumya did it like this, or here somebody did it like this. So we will still use real examples at that point. But knowing what kind of material are you dealing with will be a very appropriate way for me to sort of bring back the platforms or the tools which you could use. Yes.
Also, I want to check whether you would advocate social media for something like this, like a Facebook page, or would that because that way conversations can be multiple ways.
Yeah.
Whereas typically like a blog, it would be one way. So I'm also looking at a way whereby the public can engage and interact. Like they may be having a similar memory to share, or a resonance with a particular period in history. Like, I have ancestors who have lived through historical events. So I'm
Right.
interested in like that kind of a living histories project also. So people may want to contribute and say, hey, my grandfather was also blah, blah, blah during either partition or the Bengal famine, or in Lahore at this time, or they worked in the services.
Sure.
You
So
know what I
this
mean?
question I'm going to hold on to
Yeah.
for many reasons, because it's a bit of a longer answer.
Okay.
So hopefully take it up in the afternoon or in the evening. But I
Yeah,
have
sure, no hurry. Just
because
suddenly struck me.
yeah, this Facebook versus blogs is a very interesting question, and I think I'll just share my opinion, but it might be a conversation where everybody can pitch in from what
Sure.
they know.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Aparna. That's a good question. I know.
Thank you.
Shweta?
Okay, so I have to switch on two things. I forget. So yeah, mine was a bit of an overlap with what Aparna is talking about, but basically I just wanted to know. It was a simpler version, maybe, where I wanted to ask you if you have any examples of archiving where the dissemination of information is going parallel to archiving, because I find that very critical to whatever I'm trying to do. That it has to be on the go, because things are changing rapidly. So, and I feel that whatever I intend to do has to influence the change, or maybe it doesn't have to, but should be visible for influencing the change. I mean, and I've had some glimpses of where it has happened due to my past efforts. So I feel that is the direction it should go. So if you have any examples.
So you're talking
to share.
about, if I'm correct, you both are asking about digital dissemination and digital dissemination.
Not necessary. Not
Not
necessary. Not
Okay.
necessary. Not
Right.
necessary. In my case, not necessary. Yeah.
Yeah, because then I would say at least SEPT archives or even Patni archives, which of course you are very well aware of. These are projects which have, at least in my own experience, have been constantly disseminating, whether it's in terms of attending to research queries or so what happens more than whether somebody's doing it in parallel or not. I think the background question is, how do we do it? Because you will need your legal frameworks in place. So what happened with, at least for SEPT archives, or even in current scenario with Patni archives, in order for dissemination to go on in parallel, while the collection was still coming in, while preservation or conservation, things were being figured out. We never wanted to close our door. And what was very critical is, if somebody knocks on the door, do we know how do we allow them to access the material? And hence, a sort of this in-between step while preservation is getting set up and the building is getting set up, we spent a lot of time with the lawyers to understand, and to obviously understand the IP Act of India, what kind of a practice do we want, and what kind of documents do we want in place. So when you're thinking of digital dissemination in all your projects, I think three of you are interested. Even Tanisha is interested in a crowdsourced project. What will be important is to think of the different cases and scenarios where users are starting to use your material while it's still in formation. What are the kind of, I don't want to say restrictions, but allowances that you want to think of? What can they do with it? What can't they do with it? Who do they need clearances from? And how will you communicate that? So when it's in a physical space, it can be through a form. They read it, they sign it. I think it's a little simpler. But when some of you are thinking of crowdsourcing it or making it accessible through public platforms, how do you make sure that they read the terms and conditions before they start engaging with the archive? Because it's a very human behavior to just tick, I accept terms and conditions, and go into the platform. But it's not the same as going on a Amazon platform and clicking. So how do you tell them there's a difference in these terms and conditions before they engage in terms of building your archive with you or accessing from your digital archive? Physical me, it's a little different because you have that control over telling them how to go about it. So, you can start thinking of cases and scenarios. I can address this question, which I am only posing, that how do you help them? I know some of the answers to it, where you can bring in digital tools or you can bring in infographics. You can also bring in audio of yourself and your own team who is explaining things. You can make videos. So those answers are there. But in your planning, what will be important is to think of case-based scenarios and clearance of copyrights from your end. Yes, Tanisha.
What is really interesting from what all three of you said just now is I think we are looking at a situation where, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just trying to build something here. You, Ishita, started with dialogue and dissemination and documentation, and the moment we are reaching something like what Aparna is suggesting, or Shwetal is asking about, or I'm asking more details about, is where all these three things happen simultaneously instead of being in a linear sequence, and the tools to navigate that, right?
Right.
That is what we are trying to hold through.
Yes, that's what we're trying to do.
Perfect. That's it.
Yes, and I'm glad that this is the conclusion that's coming out of this bomb blast presentation. That is what my intention was. That more so the time calls for it, maybe, because I think visibility of projects is as important as the relevance of projects. But also because certain kinds of projects are so highly built on engagement of some or the other kind that you will yourself feel that you cannot just hold on to one activity. I definitely felt life was much simpler in 2013 when I knew I had to first wait for all the documents to come in, set practices in place, and then we will see what to do with it. It was much slower, much more handleable. And where I am with Women Architects project now, 10 years down the line or 12 years down the line, as I said, it got very scary that I cannot just sit with this material. I don't know. I mean, we lost women architects in the process of the project. And I'm talking about a project which was only 2 years old. And it's not any kind of an altruism that you go before they are lost, let's do something. No, it's the cause of the project itself. That let's have these conversations while they are there, then maybe they can pitch in. Maybe we'll get to know something more. And if you get to know something more, can it go back into the archive? Of course, it can go back into the archive. Only thing is, so the concepts become very critical. So if the conceptual take on the content which I have created as an oral historian is in place, and now somebody else has reached out to us already saying, hey, listen, I have a recording of so-and-so architect. Would you want to put it into the Women Architects project? Why not? But I have to tell them that, listen, now let me put a paperwork in place before I can take this material in. So this conceptual transition, which constantly happens along with building of the project, is what gets is important, and it gets very tricky. Because again, if I go back to the way designers used to think, again, 2 decades ago, was have your concept in place, respond to it, make your solutions, and out you are here. But it's not the case anymore. We're talking about concepts which will be constantly morphing. And I think a very good experience of that for us, at least, was the Humpy project, where every time the concept morphed, and then what we have today is an outcome of that morphing, rather than saying, oh, we started with wanting to do something for the community. Because that, that narrative itself is so troublesome that you want to do something for somebody else whose material it is. So that, yeah, you become humbler also in the act of in the act of curation and archiving. You let the material decide, you let the participants decide, and you grow with it, and you let things change. But what your role will still remain, your responsibility will still remain. And I think that's the more critical part of it. And of course, also to say somewhere also, I think what I am learning from others is don't overtake responsibility also. So I think I should share that with you all. That, okay, I could have only done this much. Yes, Shwetal, we are anyways taking a 10-minute tea break. So I was just saying that, yes, also do not overtake responsibility. And once you have this conceptual clarity, this is all that this project was supposed to achieve. Now, if something more could happen in this project, this could also have been looked at, sure, I'm okay to hear somebody out with that critique, but why don't you come join us, or why don't you bring that perspective in? It could be from the community members and not just our peers. That's very critical to accept. Community members might say, madam, ye bhi kar sakte the aap. And yes, hum ye bhi kar sakte the. I hope everybody is okay with Hindi. If anybody is not, please let me know. But yes, ये भी कर सकते थे, but अभी के लिए हम इतना ही करने के लिए आए थे. Yeah, this is all that I could achieve in the given grant, in the given support system, and a lot of it can become the future of the project. So that's equally important when we're talking about so many roles and responsibilities. Okay, so I'm glad we all agree that documentation, dialogue, and dissemination are always going to be in flux in the kind of archiving in today's day and age and the kind of projects you all are talking about. With that, let's take a short break. We have overrun a little bit, but I think in the exercise area, we have some room for that, so that's okay. Let's come back in 10 minutes, so 11:30, if we can restart. And yes, based on these conversations, we have some interesting exercises in mind, which we'll all put ourselves through for our own projects. Great. Okay, see you all in 10 minutes. The link is open. So no worries, nobody needs to leave. Just you can shut your camera and mic.